My idea for this was to use this research project as a basis for the further research I explained that I'm going to do next year. So I am looking at David Bergelson, specifically one of his Berlin stories, which he wrote when he was there in the 20s, called Zwischen Immigranten, or Among Refugees, which is sort of the story of this man comes to a writer's house and tells him the story about how he came to Berlin and how he found himself living across the hallway from a pogromist and has plans to kill him, and the sort of psychological breakdown of this young man. But what I'm doing is I'm looking at that in terms of, first of all, there's a translation out, but I'm translating it myself to try and look at it from a different perspective than the original translation. But you know, I'm not trying to compete with them. It's Neugerschall. You can't do that. And then I want to look at it in terms of how the story represents layers of exile. So, sort of generic and ever-present Jewish exile from Israel. The idea of the writer as an exile from their own society, and the sort of biographical exile from shtetl life, from the Pale, from Russia, that Bergelson and his characters in the story were going through. And I want to see how these are portrayed, and see how the perspective of exile alters the perception of urban life, which in itself for Eastern European Jews is an exile. I've yet to read a story by him that I didn't just utterly fall in love with. And then when I first read this one, like, I had to read it twice because I couldn't not. It just tugged at my heartstrings and spoke to my soul, I guess is the way to put it. But there's something about expressionist writing, especially and now that I've been reading in the Yiddish original, that the way they talk about life, and the way they talk about the way this story in particular talks about the sort of psychological breakdown of this character as he's narrating the story of his psychological breakdown, is just, this was the story about which I couldn't stop thinking. So I already wanted to do Bergelson because his sort of, it fit, his life and his writing fit really well in with my research goals. Sort of idea of like the fact that he returned to the Soviet Union for like individual and generally ideological reasons, and then, you know, the way he died and everything, being executed by Stalin in '52. But when I read the stories, I just couldn't stop thinking about this one, and it's one of the most beautiful stories I've ever read, but also one of the most heartbreaking.